Right, folks, at the top of the show, I mentioned the case of Kamar Campbell's sudden collapse during a meet on Saturday. This comes a few years after Dominic James's incident, 2016. And Dominic James, if you don't know, is the St. George's College captain who just went about 4 or 5 minutes into the game. So in light of this, we've invited the Dean of UA's Faculty of Sport, my very good friend, Dr. Akshay Mansingh, to talk about investing in proper heart screening for athletes. Morning, friend. Welcome to Smile Jamaica.
Morning, Doc.
The headline says, we still lack proper heart screening. Mansingh. You said that?
I did say that in part of a 2-minute interview,
Yeah.
and I think they captured the rest of it right. So it's just that the headline sort of focuses on the heart. I think the more accurate thing is that we lack proper screening.
What is screening?
So screening, as you can imagine, is a method of sifting out certain things. And in this case, we're talking about pre-participation screening of an athlete. And that means when it's done, actually, it's done in a way where there's a questionnaire that they have to fill out with a lot of questions that are sort of designed and universally used. And those questions are probing. So they'll ask you things like, with regards to the heart, does your heart race after you've done exercise? Do you black out after exercise? Do you feel pain in your chest? Does anybody in your family have a heart issue? And they sort of probe that. And you probe other things as well. And then there's an examination done, usually by a general doctor who will sort of check the entire body, including the heart and so on. And then usually a sports medicine musculoskeletal physician or physiotherapist to check on muscle problems and joint problems.
I want to jump in there. If I go to my family doctor and he checks my heart and whatever comes up on ECG, he says, you're fine. What's the difference if I go to a sports medicine
So I haven't actually
doctor?
gotten to the ECG yet, because I'm saying this is just examination.
Right.
Here comes the musculoskeletal part. I'm emphasizing that, because to be honest, the heart problem is very emotive. It causes a lot of reaction every time something like this happens. We speak, but it's very rare. And what's more common is for athletes not progressing because of other injuries, which can be picked up on screening. So I want to put it in as a package. Now, having done that, depending on resources available and so on, there are blood tests that you should be doing. An ECG is something which was considered sort of mandatory, even though it was fully recognized that it's not going to pick up all the heart
Yeah, but
problems.
my point is, what's the difference
So,
with a sports
sure.
medicine doctor and
Yeah.
just a regular
Well,
doctor,
they're totally-
if he does the same
yeah,
test?
with regard to the ECG, a sports cardiologist in particular, there are differences in an athlete on their ECG, which are actually normal or variants of normal. And so what can happen and does happen is that up to almost 30% of the athletes may have what's called a false positive, which means that the non-trained cardiologist or ECG reader will say, oh, there's an abnormality here. Now that leads to two things. One, a lot of anxiety, and possibly further testing. And two, many people who probably have normal variants of their heart will be denied playing any sport because somebody said, I can give you an example. We actually had a player for West Indies, one of the West Indies teams, not the test team, but one of the other teams, who was on tour. And he had a problem and was seen by a cardiologist in England. And the cardiologist in England quite clearly stated in his report that I'm not a sports cardiologist, and what he has is probably a variant of normal. But I think that he should have this test done and he shouldn't play any further until he has the test done. And of course, the tour finished, and the person never played for West Indies A again, not because of the heart issue, but because he just wasn't picked. But here was an opportunity denied because somebody who wasn't sure of the normal variants ruled out the person. So the argument around the world is, hold on, the ECG, firstly, will show abnormalities to be abnormalities when they're actually normal in an athlete. And then you have somebody reading it who's not au fait with it. That's going to rule out a lot of people. So that perhaps is the difference, that you need somebody who's aware of the variations amongst athletes.
Can I ask you, Doc, what are some other signs that you could detect early that would then say, okay, you should not participate in this activity?
The signs obvious is if you find that you're getting tired when you're running. I mean, an athlete is supposed to be able to have a certain level of fitness. If you feel dizziness or faintness, or if in fact you feel fainted. And secondly, I think a very important thing is if there's a family history of similar things.
And a lot of this is from the questionnaire.
A lot of that's in the questionnaire. If you feel pain,
Right.
in the chest area and so on. So these are from the questionnaire and further probing.
What other tests can be done when we look at pre-screening from the head to the soles of your feet?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about just general screening, you can carry this to the nth degree. So there are countries in the world who, for their elite athletes, do a full body MRI every year.
Oh.
Just as a screen. That has a problem too, because it'll pick up things that perhaps are not abnormal. So you've always got to wait with the clinical scenario. And in medicine, there's no investigation that supersedes that history and examination that a doctor does. So with regards to the heart, the echocardiogram, which is an ultrasound of the heart, is mandatory for FIFA events, for example.
Okay.
And is the next step. So if somebody picks up an abnormality, yes, you can do the echocardiogram. The question is, once again, a matter of cost. And when I'm saying cost, it sounds callous to say, oh, you would have, you could save the incidence of a heart, for somebody dropping dead with a heart problem in North America, for example, is the same as them being struck by lightning.
Oh. Okay.
So it's very rare. It's 1 in 100,000 thereabouts.
Okay.
The one big study that was done in Italy regarding ECGs showed that they could drop that by about, so the death rate was 0.01%, and they could drop that to 0.03%. So it wasn't, in terms of numbers, a massive drop. But of course, if you're the one person whose life is saved, then it's a massive thing.
Some people in the medical field have suggested don't do the test. Just have some equipment there that if never fall down, there's a defibrillator. It don't make sense to do the test. And I think I picked up in your response earlier that you're saying there could be an abnormality, but I could still perform.
I think what we need to do is have a comprehensive approach. This knee-jerk reaction that somebody has a heart problem and is getting ECG done on every athlete is probably not the way to go. There has to be a comprehensive thing. And Jamaica, as a sporting country, needs to make its own policy so that it's available to everybody and applicable to everybody. So, in my view, that pre-participation screening is absolutely essential. Whether you do the ECG, which is a matter of resources, we can discuss later, but that's absolutely essential they go through that screening. Having done that, it's been shown that if you have a defibrillator present, because the first 3 minutes are what count. So if you have a defibrillator present...
Defibrillator, for those watching, is
that machine you see they put on the chest and deliver an electric shock.
Yeah.
In sporting cardiac problems, it saves about half of the people who fall down. And if you remember that football in Premier Division, that because it was televised, you saw this ambulance come out and boom, 50%. So in my view, if I have limited resources, I'd prefer to have a defibrillator at every match with somebody who can use it.
Right.
Who's at every match? The referee, at least.
Neville Bell.
Yeah, but there are 18 matches going on at once,
know,
he
I'm
tells me.
messing.
Yeah? But the point I'm making, and I'll tell you something about Neville in a second if you'll allow me to say it.
Yes, I'd love to
but
hear.
If we train the referees
Yes.
in basic life support system training, which includes how to use a defibrillator, and ensure that there's a defibrillator with every referee at every match,
Okay, then.
maybe that's a better idea.
Yeah.
If you have limited resources. If I had all the resources to my disposal, I'd want ECG and defibrillator. The idea of having an ambulance, I thought was a great idea until Neville reminded me that there are about 80 matches going on at once.
Yes, and we don't have
And we don't have 80 ambulances. And then what happens, and here's what the screening is about. So that's a precautionary method. What happens to a person with a heart attack at home who needs an ambulance, but it's not available because it's at a football match where it's a 0.01% chance of that happening. If I'm permitted, having gotten that screen and gotten an abnormality, it's then the responsibility of the coach and the parents to carry it forward.
Yes.
And what I wanted to share with you was that many years ago, on the morning of a Manning Cup final, said Neville Bell turned up at my house with a player who had an issue. And honestly, we couldn't at that time rule in or rule out whether it was a cardiac issue, but it was so unlikely to be cardiac that the first thing I did was obviously call a cardiologist and say, listen, this is what's happened, what's your advice? And the person said, to be honest, if this is what it happens, rare as it may be, I think it's better that we screen him further. Manning Cup final. And Coach Neville Bell said, if that is his advice, we're not going to play him. Now, I don't know how many coaches would have had that responsible approach. I hope they're not focusing on him. But did not have that. But it was something that stayed with me for life, because I can tell you coaches who would have said, oh, very, very unlikely chance. No, this Manning Cup finals, let's go for it. But in the end, it's the responsibility lies with family, friends, coaches, once you have an abnormality.
Yep. You also said that, speaking of Kemoy, that you weren't certain, you couldn't be certain that he wasn't screened. You're not there. From what you've heard, from what you've read, will he be able to compete again?
You know, it's going to be very hard to imagine that they're going to have to find out the problem. Now, here's the thing. If it was a heart issue, because you can drop down for many, many reasons, right? And as I was saying in another forum, that it can be from dehydration, it can be from viral illnesses. Obviously, this probably wasn't because the aftermath. You then have to find out what it is. There are correctable problems, including with the heart, which if you deal with that, then yes, you can run again. And then there's some things which are just too iffy. Yeah. And once again, do no harm is the main idiom of medicine.
Yep. I'm not certain I got a response when I said some medical people said don't do it because, as you said, 0.0.
Yeah, don't do the ECG. Now, what I'm saying is that we have a comprehensive approach which must mandate a pre-participation screen.
So you are saying they should
I'm saying don't screen. I didn't say ECG, right? What I'm saying is that the
screen.
ECG comes in much later. I want to have that screen and the general. You know, in the UK, for example, 30% of athletes, their first visit to a doctor is through a pre-participation screen.
Who would pay for that for
Well,
our athletes?
so that's what I'm saying, a national policy.
Yes.
Because
okay.
if we're mandating this for all, in Italy, where they did the ECG studies, anybody who participates in sports has to do an ECG.
Right.
So in Israel, they did a similar study and found that this really didn't reduce deaths. In Canada, they did a study. So now, Canada, USA, Europe, Israel are saying, hold on, maybe the ECG shouldn't be done. So you've got to individualize it.
Right.
If we're so emotive about it in Jamaica that it really hurts us as it does to the heart, then maybe it's a national policy. We should have some subsidies, some sort of thing, government subvention, insurance companies come together and say, as a national service, we'll do this. So somebody has to pay for it, you're absolutely correct. But what I'm saying is I don't want to hear about everybody paying for an ECG at the expense of just a general medical test,
right.
or seeing if the hamstrings are tight, or anything else, which would ruin an athlete's career as well.
Thanks for coming, my friend.
Yes,
Thanks for having me. I
Good to see you.
hope it's clarified some issues.
And I actually want to know more about what you're doing at the University of the West Indies, the Faculty of
I
Sport.
want to know more about your third test.
And I need you to screen him for me.
Right.
You hear that?
Yes.
He's the Dean of the Faculty of Sport, and as I said earlier, he's been our analyst for many, many years, cricket analyst. His sons are fantastic, and he now runs the Faculty of Sport. You're still in charge of the cricket for the West Indies also?
No, I resigned from that a year and a half ago. Still CPL, but no, not West.
You need more students?
We need students.
Yeah?
A university's job is to teach.
I will
We
give
need
a quick,
students.
I will give
So
a
you
quick
need more
joke.
students.
I will give a
All
quick
right, putting
joke.
it out there.
Hold on, I will give you a quick joke. His name is spelled A-K-S-H-A-I.
So pronounce
So we
it.
call him Akshay. So we were doing cricket for like 4 years. So one day I called the scorer, like I call him Jimmy. So we come back in and him just turn around and say, by the way, my name is Jimmy. You know. Like it's about 3 years we I call him Jimmy. So I said, what's your name? So like him say, Neville. And then he says, by the way, it's not some my name pronounced. So after we have called him Akshay for 4 years.
Can you
right?
pronounce it for us?
Akshay,
Yeah.
which
Akshay.
Neville does. Yeah.
Yes, no,
Yeah,
no,
he does.
I didn't know,
Yeah.
but
Akshay,
before.
So A-K-S-H.
AI. But I-
S-H-A-I is Akshay.
Akshay.
Yeah,
Akshay.
but I always said Akshay, and then 4 years later I don't say it. So
I get why
I
you
also
said
told you
Akshay.
pronunciations vary, right?
go for a break. Soon come.
Dr. Mansi.